I have been dreaming for many years of an f4 standard zoom that brought that versatility to the table but didn't compromise on image quality, and I think I finally found one. This is the Nikon Z-mount 24-120 S lens. This is, I think, that holy grail f4 standard zoom in so much as that it really is super versatile. It maintains all of that versatility of the f4 standard zoom 24-105s normally, but it is also, the image quality is outstanding on this lens. I really feel like it's barely a compromise, if at all, from the much more expensive 2.8 glass, such as the 24-70, even the 70-200 in some of the similar ranges. So we're going to take a look at this lens, and we're also going to take a look at some of the images I've taken with this lens today. And I think by the end of this video, I think if you're a Nikon shooter, or you want to be a Nikon shooter, I think you will be interested in adding this lens to your bag. All right, let's start out with design and build quality. This lens is very reasonably sized. Take the hood off, which the hood comes out big, which, you know, it makes sense, it is 24, but take that hood off and you have a very small, compact lens. Fits in any bag. However, it's small and compact, but still feels substantial enough that it can be paired with some of these bigger Nikon Z bodies, such as the Z9, which is actually the camera I've spent most of the time shooting this lens on, and most of the samples that you are about to see are taken with that Z9. It extends in 2 stages. It's a 2-stage extender, which, you know, I guess in theory that's a downside, because this second stage is another place for dust and grit to get in. I've had no trouble with it. I've been shooting with it for over a year and not had any trouble with anything getting in the lens. As far as like the design language, and it's more of that kind of second generation Z lens a little bit, which is more like the 100-400, which is right here attached to the Z8. And so it really just, I feel like, balances out being light and compact, but also substantial enough that it goes on any of Nikon's bodies. The only criticism I have of the design of this lens is the control ring. Nikon just has the worst implementation of the control rings of any of the companies. It's non-clicked, it's declicked, I guess is how you would say it. Declicked is great for video, but for stills, I just don't actually see the value in it at all. I think of a dial on a camera as something that like you change without really looking at it, without thinking about it, and you tend to move in either stops or third stops, half stops, whatever increments. So like if you have this set to aperture and you change the aperture, first off, you've got to look at the setting either on the back of the screen or the viewfinder while you're changing it. And secondly, you tend to go way past what you're trying to do, because it's not, you know, you're not doing a click. Like if you're at 5.6, you're not clicking over to f8, you're rolling over and it will go past, and it's not, it doesn't make anything faster. It doesn't make anything easier, because like I said, you have to look at the settings while you're changing them. And what makes it even maybe the worst of all of that would be a wash, except that you bump it all the time where it is. If we're out here on the end, I suppose you can do that, which I think, this is something I'll have to look into, but I think you can actually switch the rolls of these two, which I guess helps in some form, but really, it's great for video shooters. You can do digital zoom, you can do aperture changes, clickless aperture changes. So it's great for video shooters, but I just wind up turning it off. So I think that that's kind of sad, and it's a poor implementation. I would have, if it just clicked, it would help it, you know, have another dial. To be honest, I just wish that Nikon would put another dial on the back of their cameras and not one that's kind of useless on their lenses. So that's the only real criticism of the overall design and build quality of this lens. Otherwise, it really is truly fantastic. So performance, before we jump into image quality, I will just real quick mention autofocus. It's stellar. The autofocus bottlenecks are gonna be more in the Nikon Z cameras you're using more than the lenses. So you have nothing to worry about autofocus here. It's fast, it's silent. Yeah, it's great. Okay, so now we're going to look at some images on the computer, and I can kind of share some of my thoughts on image quality and show you some of the images I've captured with this lens. Here is a image from a place you might recognize, and this I feel like does a great job of showing the rendering and the sharpness. I'm gonna click in, and you can see it is crazy tack sharp. And I feel like that's one of the big strengths of this 24-120 is that, like, I made a whole video about the Nikon 24-70-2.8, which is also a great lens. And I talked about that it had a great character to it and a good rendering to it. And I feel like that's what this lens brings to the table. Kind of comparing it to the 24-70-2.8, you know, you watch some videos and it will say it's similar sharpness, not quite as sharp. They're kind of all over the place. All I can really provide is my personal experience, and I have not owned both the 24-70 and the 24-120 at the same time, but just looking at the images from the 24-70 and this lens, I don't see a significant either sharpness drop off between the two, or a rendering drop off. And I think that's the rendering, that's a difficult term to pin down, but to me that's something that's missing from a normally less expensive lens, is a richer rendering, how the fall off between in focus and out of focus, and the way that colors render. And going back to some of these images like this of Delicate Arch, I feel like I get a rendering I would normally expect from, honestly, a prime or at minimum a 24-70-2.8. And you can see sharpness. Let's jump to this one in Zion National Park. This is a little further. Let's see the focal length. So this is 37 millimeters. So I really actually should be showing you guys a sampling of focal lengths. So this is going to be 37. This is a panorama, by the way, which is why it's a 37 millimeter, but also seems wide. So kind of in that range. Here's a 73, so kind of right in the middle of the range. We'll zoom in there. Here's 37. Apparently, I really like 37. Interesting. This one's going to be more zoomed in, 71. Like I said, right in the middle of that range. You can see the detail, and I love the way the color. I feel like Nikon files really shine in Utah. I was trying to find, here is a 27.5 millimeter, so towards the beginning of the focal range. And this is a focus stacked image, and you can see phenomenal sharpness at 27.5, which is close to 24. Let's see, let's look at a couple other ones. Here's one at 120, so you can see all the way out the end of the zoom range. Like, I don't know. I can't ask for better image quality than that out of a standard zoom. I really don't feel like I can. And to have it hold up at 120, here's a 95 millimeter, you know, and before I zoom in, I can let you actually look at the image there. And I like that. Let's look at some other ones. Here's 98. So As you can see, I do shoot a lot of panoramas, and that has me kind of in the middle to the telephoto end of the zoom range a lot. But here's a 51 millimeter. Yeah, I constantly am impressed with when I punch into this lens, how sharp it is. And some color rendering. Here is sunrise in Zion. There's some of the color rendering. Now I don't have a lot of like test charts or things like that. I prefer when I'm sharing my thoughts and evaluation on a lens to really kind of show you what I've taken with it and what I can do with it. There's value in looking at and scrutinizing sharpness, but I think you lose a lot of what the lens can do if you make your decisions solely on that. And that's just not really how I want to share my thoughts. I want to show you kind of what I'm able to do, because I feel like final product is at the end of the day what you're looking for. You're looking for what can I do with this lens from the moment of capture clear through to finished image that I'm sharing on social media or printing or whatever it is you're doing with that image. So that's why I kind of, with these images, want to show you final finished images and kind of how they turned out at the end. So let's look at just a couple more images here. This one's at 66 mil. I don't like the color quite as much on that, but that could be kind of the edit. But from a rendering and sharpness perspective, absolutely flawless. I really like this image more and more. I'm just looking at it here and I'm just keep seeing it on the small thumbnail and being like, I actually really like this image. As you can see, I am using Capture One to show you these images and to edit most of these images. I have discovered over the last, actually really a couple months, I have discovered that Capture One does a better job with Nikon files than Lightroom. I just like the files that are coming out of Capture One, the edits and the way that it renders and raw files much more than Lightroom. That's not true necessarily across the board. I don't think Capture One's a necessarily completely better program than Lightroom. And if you're shooting Canon or Sony, I have not noticed much of a difference. Maybe a little bit, but not enough to really, purchase the program and be using it full time. But with Nikon files, it makes a significant difference, especially with those Z9 and Z8 files. And like images like this, where there's a lot of kind of intricate color play at play, I prefer the way that Capture One is doing it. You may not, but I think if you're a Nikon shooter, recommend trying Capture One. I can't really talk about the 24-120 though in the Nikon Z lineup without talking about the myriad of other options that exist for standard zooms in the Nikon Z system. And this one's maybe my favorite, not maybe, it is my favorite, but there's a lot to pick from. So you have the 24-72-8, which I've made a whole video about that lens. Again, phenomenal lens. It took that Mount of the Holy Cross picture right up there. I love that lens. So you have that lens, the 24-72-8. It's significantly bigger and heavier with similar sharpness and rendering. So that's kind of where I'm at with that. You also have a 24-70 f4, which I have not used, but I hear good things about. You have a 28-75 lens, which is probably a Tamron rebrand. That would be my guess. So yeah, you have the 28-75. And then you have this lens's true biggest competition, which is the 24-200 4 to 6.3. The 24-200 has a couple of things going for it. Well, I guess this lens already has one big thing going for it, is that it goes clear out to 120, which Canon, Sony, none of the other brands really have a standard f4 zoom that goes past 105. So that in and of itself very valuable because that extra, I mean, it's not that much extra reach, but it turns out it kind of is in that range where it gives you just enough that I can bring this lens, just this lens on a lot of projects, which is really valuable. So just going from that 105 to 120, you know, it's 15 millimeters, but it makes a difference. But that 24 to 200 goes from 24 clear to 200. And it has built-in stabilization. So if you're a landscape photographer, then that's extremely valuable when you're, you know, shooting handheld, or if because it's slower and you're at 6.3 at 200, maybe even stopping down to f8 to get a little more image quality. I have used that lens a little bit, and I've used it enough to know that it's also really good and really tempting. The pricing is close enough that it's a hard choice, but at the end of the day, I feel like the slightly better build quality and slightly better image quality, and it is slight, but it is better image quality of this lens beats out that 24 to 200. Comparing this on a more zoomed out level to other brands' standard f4 zooms, I've used both the Sony 24 to 105 and the Canon RF 24 to 105. This lens is superior to both of those lenses, like hands down. Like it's not close. They are, both of those lenses are fine. Particularly the Sony is fine. I feel like the Canon RF 24 to 105, it just honestly, it leaves a chunk to be desired. I feel like Canon could have done better with that, especially as the close-up image quality is really kind of a mess, and it just doesn't render as well as some of those other RF lenses. I've just been disappointed in that RF 24 to 105. So yeah, I'm kind of comparing between those two. Another note though would be that Sony has the very interesting 20 to 70, which is kind of another f4 standard zoom that instead of going out to, out tighter to 120, it goes wider to 20. And I am very intrigued to maybe give that lens a try at some point, because I've heard it's sharp and super compact, and sometimes more than zooming in, especially with landscape photography, more than zooming in, you actually need to back out that little more than 24. So I could see that being a versatile lens, but I can't really compare these two head to head yet. Those two head to head, because I haven't tried that 20 to 70. If this video was valuable to you at all, it would really be helpful if you would hit that like button down below. And then also please subscribe and turn on notifications for this channel. We have so much stuff coming up. I've got a whole guide, landscape photography guide for the Nikon Z8 coming in the next few weeks. It's the big project right now that I am working on. It's going to be 3 parts. I'm going to be breaking down menu setup, accessories, and then we're going to be going in the field, doing shoots. We're going to be editing files. It's going to be a whole full-length thing just on the Nikon Z8 and how to use it for landscape photography. So I'm super excited for that. And so please subscribe and hit the notification so you don't miss out on that. I'm also going to put a link to a gallery of all the images that I've shared, as well as a few more in the description below, so you can go and you can look and you can pixel peep, excuse me, at some of the images from this lens and see how you feel about it. And yeah, with that, we'll see you on the next adventure.